So our first deputy is Courtney Betty. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Board members, first of all, I want to congratulate you on a great vision of what you put forward and the thought of trying to be proactive in dealing with an issue that has recognized tremendous impact. There's a concern that I have, though, and I'll just kind of focus on it a little bit. It's recognized in the report, and there's a couple of references that are made primarily to the Ontario Human Rights Commission report, which highlighted that racialized groups are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Also highlighted that a disproportionate number of arrests for cannabis possession under the current system are among members of racialized and vulnerable communities. As a former Crown attorney at City Hall prosecuting drug cases for many years, I can attest to that. And so as we now begin to put in a framework where we're still today having companies that are valued $1.5 billion trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and yet still we've got young people in marginalized communities being arrested for possession, we've got to kind of figure out what is the solution here. And taking it from a public health standpoint is interesting because public health also includes the social conditions of these various communities. And so I think it's critical that as we move forward in developing this approach, that we do not take a top-down approach. Like, we are not here, and I don't think that many of us are capable of solving the problems that exist within these communities. You have many young people over the years. If you look at the whole carding issue that's happened, Susan Eng, when she was Commissioner of Police, highlighted many years ago that if we had the same amount of intense police scrutiny happening on Bay Street, we may have some element of a similar type of arrest. So my approach is that the committee needs to also bear in mind the levers for equity lens that was actually chaired through the Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights group, former chair Joe Mihevc. And what that means is that we're going to look at equitable means and outcomes for all. It requires the removal of systematic barriers and accommodations of differences whereby individuals and groups can benefit equally. So if we're now going to create a system, and I don't think we can ignore the fact that this is predicted to be potentially the largest industry that the world has ever seen, maybe $21 billion by some time within the next 4 or 5 years. It would be extremely unfortunate for us to allow the communities that have been the target, that have had the suffering, not to achieve some of the benefits. The City of Oakland, for example, have come up with a very strong diversity approach where they've looked at the challenges that these communities have faced and said these are the things that we can do. Because I think public health is not just about solving diseases. It has to be about the mental state of the individuals and also their economics. We all know that the economic conditions play a major role. So I think just in summary, there's definitely a critical need to help vulnerable populations. We can't just talk about education anymore. We're going to throw a program together that goes into the public schools. I think we've got to go to the community organizations, the people that are interacting at the grassroots level with these young people, and that specifically has to be developed. I think there further has to be, as highlighted, research that's going to be done. If we're going to educate people, let us show them what the impact is going to be on potentially so that they can make an educated decision. For example, the issue of smoking. I don't think anyone in public health is going to support smoking. Are there alternatives that if someone wants to consume cannabis that they should be looking at? And that should be presented. So again, I want to congratulate the group. I felt impelled to be here today. I'm here as a private individual. I do think, though, that at times from City Hall we kind of make these decisions. I don't want to use the word in a cloud, but in many situations we leave out the groups that are most impacted. And I think Councillor Mihevc very well knows what that leads to in some challenges with community backlash and all the things that may happen where we don't fully take into account the concerns of that community. And I hope to look to see that as this report progresses, and I think it was raised earlier on by Peter Wong, that the equity component becomes a key element in driving it, not just from a health standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an education standpoint, but also very critical from an economic standpoint. Again, thank you and congratulations for the direction.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Betty, are there any questions? Yes, Courtney, we have a questioner. Trustee Glover.
I hear what you're saying, and I note that when I go downtown, there's all these cannabis shops that have set up, but in the area that I represent, there are no cannabis shops, at least none that are quasi-legit, I guess, and so there's money to be made off of this.
Absolutely.
But it's not going to be made by the people that have been criminalized for selling pot and selling drugs for so long. So do you have specific recommendations about what the Board of Health should do at this point with these recommendations?
Well, I think the recommendations are excellent, but I think that the element of equity, and equity looking at the broader context of social, education, economics, I think it's fascinating that in Colorado, which has over 1,000 dispensaries, there's only 1% that's minority-owned. So that is a major challenge. If we want to bring about changes in these communities, and it's interesting, as I sat here, I remember being interviewed by the Globe and Mail probably 25 years ago when I stated in an article that I've never met a drug dealer that likes to sell drugs. It's strictly a question of economics. Right. So if we can use this as a tool to begin to achieve change in these communities, I think it's a great opportunity for Toronto. We always try and say, well, this is a federal responsibility, this is a provincial responsibility, and then at the end of the day, you get caught in this whole myriad of governments, and then the people that are not sitting at the table are the ones that are left out. So I definitely think that in moving forward, one of the recommendations would be that the element of equity be broadened to look at the issues that you raised, which includes economic, social, education, but with a strong community participation and consultation process.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome. I had a question about what would it take to actually the decriminalize piece here? Because as you've said, many of those who've been charged, there's an large racialized community that's borne the brunt of marijuana charging or being charged with possession. What would it take to decriminalize that marijuana, and also to scrub the records of people that have been charged with marijuana?
I think at the core of it, that is the key element, that we all should recognize the impact that's already happened and the damage on young people who have been disproportionately affected. So I think part of the recommendation should strongly be that some system of pardon actually take place for individuals that have been charged with simple possession. Trafficking may be a whole other issue, but certainly for simple possession, that should be an issue that the City of Toronto should really pursue very strongly. On the criminalization aspect of it, there's always going to be, I mean, even if we put in place a legal framework that's going to be adopted by the federal government, there's still going to be a room for criminal charges to be laid. Now, if you take, for example, if you look at, we've got about 120,000 people in Canada right now that are utilizing through the medical system. Well, how many people in these marginalized communities actually know that there is a medical system? Because some of them may actually be using recreational marijuana because they've got pain, because they've got these other issues. My daughter was here, 15 years old, said to me, "Daddy, but what about the people that have cancer that utilize marijuana for pain?" And they're not going through the medical system. They may be buying it in another way, but potentially they're now subject to be criminally charged.
And can I ask you, because you know the courts, for trafficking, well, how much marijuana would you have to be charged with trafficking?
I don't know if it's the amount that you have, it's the actual transaction of selling it to someone. So you could actually sell a very small amount. It could be a $20, just a small gram of marijuana, and you can actually end up with a charge of trafficking. It's the actual sale of the product itself.
So currently, people are being charged with possession and trafficking in the City of Toronto.
I think the report highlighted that, and maybe the medical officer can just answer that, because that is certainly happening.
I did see a whole police sheet showing me that people are still being charged.
People are still being charged. There's still the process that's going through the court system. And the part of it, and I think the medical officer highlighted it, is that even if you go through and you get some sort of a discharge, potentially you might still be barred from the United States from entry. Just the fact that you actually have a drug charge, irrespective of the outcome.
So unlike Trustee Glover, I have a lot of medical, not they're so-called medical marijuana dispensaries in my ward, lots and lots. And I am thinking, from what you've said, there are a large number of people going in, they're selling large amounts of drugs, and they are still operating. But some of my residents are being charged with possession or trafficking for hand-to-hand sales of marijuana. It does not seem fair at all that commercial businesses are operating in this way. I just call it the void. It's a terrible situation we've been put in between the federal government and the way they've approached this. But I don't know how we can highlight that situation, and actually, I'd like your advice on that.
Yeah. Well, it is a very challenging situation when you're looking at businesses that are legally operating, that are creating, millions of dollars, not necessarily the licensed producers. We're now talking about the dispensaries or recreational. And at the same time, you've got small individuals in communities that may be charged. And I think at some point, it would be great for the city just to come up with a position. I think Vancouver has had to deal with it, where the city of Vancouver, I believe, has said, well, to the police, we're not going to have law enforcement take certain steps. And the police actually agreed with that. And I think the Metro Toronto Police are probably in a situation where they're seeking direction to follow, because I don't think that they take any joy in necessarily going out and laying these charges for simple possession. But in some cases, they may have no other choice. So I think there is a critical need at this point for the city to give that direction, whatever it may be, as to what those dispensaries and how they should be operating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
Thank you, Councilman
for your
Herbal.
helpful presentation.
And I should remark that it's very, to any city staff that are listening, to see a recommendation come forward that starts to apply an equity lens to our decision-making at the city, albeit a minor one, and we're tweaking it a little bit on the way, but that we're at least starting to have this come from the senior public service. This is really, really important to our city, to ensure that all of these policies take on that equity lens. And we should encourage all divisions to spend time to say, when we're developing this policy, what will happen to all groups in our city, particularly those that are underserved, or in this case, targeted and preyed upon by the authorities. So I would hope that we can adopt that recommendation and move this forward. Thank you.
So I'll speak briefly to what my motion is about. There are, as you know, going to be a lot of concerns with community groups and those who are already, I guess, criminalized because of their personal use of marijuana. So I'm just really concerned that the consultation process may not be including, as it is, those who are most at risk of being affected by the legalization. So my motion that I have up there is a recommendation to 2F in the report. So that the medical officer of health would be amended to add community groups that serve vulnerable, racialized, equity-seeking groups, and to ensure that the consultation process allows these community groups to review all the recommendations being made by the Board of Health to ensure fair and equitable regulation of cannabis for personal use. And I say this because, again, I'm really concerned with how law enforcement might be handling this, and then also the youth component of the age appropriateness of 19. There might be some individuals in our community that don't feel that that's appropriate, so it'd be good to give them an opportunity to see all that we're recommending.